Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. Today, I'm delighted we're going to be speaking to Cal Major, who is a paddleboarder, surfer, environmentalist, a vet and an ocean lover. Cal is incredibly passionate about the oceans and ending the damage done by plastic. She's gone on some incredible challenges to help raise awareness about the problem of the plastic pollution. Cal, welcome to the Tough Girl podcast. Amazing to have you here.
Great to be here, and great that there are so many women now doing really cool, adventurous things and being able to talk about it. So thank you for inviting me along.
No, it's awesome because I was reading your Twitter handle and you are a paddleboarder, a surfer, environmentalist. You're part of Surfers Against Sewage. You're an adventurer. You're a lover of vans. You created Paddle versus Plastic. You've done a huge amount of stuff, which is amazing. And we're going to be talking all about that. But I'd love for you just to tell everybody a little bit more about you.
Okay, a bit more about me. I consider myself just to be a fairly normal person. I live by the sea, and the sea is everything to me, basically. That's where I get all my joy and all my pleasure, and it's where I find the best version of myself. So I think that's where my love of the sea has come along. And deep down in my heart, I am a surfer and I'm a paddleboarder, and that's how I sort of identify myself. And through my surfing and my paddleboarding and my love of the environment, I've created a campaign called Paddle Against Plastic, which is basically a way to talk to people about environmentalism through what I love, which is paddleboarding and the ocean. What else about me? I'm also a veterinary surgeon, so that's my sort of job, if you like, although part-time. That's what I've been doing for the last few years, last sort of 5 or 6 years since I graduated. So there's lots of different elements to my life at the minute. There's the vet work, there's the surfing for pleasure and enjoyment, and kite surfing for pleasure and enjoyment. There's a paddleboarding for that as well. And then there's my adventures, which the whole point of which is to create some positivity around environmentalism, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit more in depth a bit later on.
Absolutely. I love the fact you live by the sea. I live by the sea as well, which is amazing. And I do love the waves and stuff. Have you always grown up by the sea? Is that where your family sort of came from? Are you?
No, absolutely not. I grew up in Warrington, which is about an hour drive from the sea. So I wasn't right by the sea from the word go. And then I went to uni in Edinburgh. So my family were always really outdoorsy. When we were kids, they'd always take us up for walks in the mountains, and we'd go to the beach. We'd go down to Wales quite a lot. So I spent quite a lot of free time around the sea, but we didn't grow up by the sea by any means. And then I went to uni. Actually had a gap year across in Australia, which was amazing. So I spent the whole time there by the sea. And I think that's where my love of surfing first really developed. Started in Wales as a kid, and then really got into that in Australia.
And then, sorry, I was going to say, tell me more, carry on.
Oh, Australia was fabulous, but it's a typical gap year story. So I'm sure everyone's heard all those before.
Did you fly into Sydney and travel up the East Coast?
I now flew into Melbourne and travelled up the East Coast. It was brilliant. It was absolutely fabulous and really nurtured that love of the environment. And I think through scuba diving, which I did in Australia, I got to know more about the creatures underwater, and I just felt so at home there. Just felt like that was where I came alive and where I felt so much happiness being around these animals and these beautiful coral reefs and just floating in the water and playing around in the waves. I went in the sea every day as often as I could and just completely fell in love with it. And then went from beautiful Australian water to the Scottish winter. I went to uni in Edinburgh and continued going in the sea. I'd go in the sea all throughout the winter with horrible hangovers in a dodgy 3mm wetsuit and no boots and gloves, and I have no idea to this day how I managed to do it, but I did. And so carried on my sort of love of the sea up there while I was training to be a vet. And then after that, I moved down to Wales, down to South Wales, where I live by the sea. And since then, I have always lived by the sea, and if I'm ever away from it for more than a few days, I start to go a bit mental. And I now live in North Devon, and my little house is right behind the beach, and I can see the whole of the beach from my bedroom window and from my living room, and it's just bliss. It's so joyful to be in this environment where I can go to the beach whenever I want. And there'll be days when I don't go down to the beach, and at the end of the day I'll be feeling a bit stressed and something will be missing. And as soon as I get down there and put either my feet or my entire body and my head in the water, it's like a cloud's lifted, and I've come back to myself, and I've come back to what it means to be alive and what it means to be human, what it means to be me. And it's such a simple, pleasurable place to be, whether I'm surfing or kite surfing or just bobbing around and giggling like a little child. It's the most perfect environment for me. And I'm well aware that that's not the same for everybody. You know, some people get that being up a mountain or in a forest or in the snow. But for me, that is the one place where I can really reconnect to who it is, what it is to be me and what it is to be a human.
Oh, I love it. I was going to say, you're so hardcore. The thought of going into the sea in Scotland in winter with a 3mm wetsuit is just...
Honestly, I wouldn't do it now. You couldn't pay me enough to do it now. But back then, when I was 18, 19, hard as nails.
Hard as nails. I'd love to know more about the surfing, because I went, when I was on my gap year, I travelled from Sydney up to Byron Bay on this like surf trip, and we had like a VW camper van, and it was about like 8 of us. We had like a couple of camper vans driving up, trying to surf, and it has to be one of the hardest things.
Yeah, it is.
It's brutal. So how did you find it?
The most frustrating sport I have ever taken on. Actually, no, kite surfing was the most frustrating. The second most frustrating sport I've ever tried. So it took years and years and years of getting bashed around by waves in washing machines with tired arms, feeling like I was drowning, feeling like I wasn't getting anywhere, feeling like I wasn't worthy to be in the waves before I started to enjoy it. And if I was to start again now, I think it would be with a very different mindset, because when I started surfing, I went in at it like, right, I want to be on those waves. I want to be smashing it like those people are. I want to be really good at it immediately. And now I hear people coming to me and saying, you know, I'll invite friends to come surfing with me, and they say, "Oh, I'm not very good at surfing. I'll just catch the white waves." And I believe that being in the water with a board or with whatever craft it is that you surf with, whether it's a hand plane or a bodyboard or a stand-up paddle or a kayak, just being in those waves and playing around in them, that to me is surfing and enjoying it, no matter how good you are at it, no matter what size the waves are, whether you manage to get out back. It's just, if you're doing it for the right reasons, if you're a proper soul surfer, you're doing it because you love being in that water and you love playing around in the waves. So I think if I went at it again now, knowing now how much being mindful in the water is, how precious that is compared to trying to achieve something in the waves, I think it would be a much more pleasant journey. But certainly it is a very difficult sport to pick up. And for the first couple of years, until you're really comfortable with how the water moves and what the tides do and the currents and how the waves break and what direction, until you can really read that water very well, it's very difficult to be able to surf the waves well and sort of get loads and loads of enjoyment being out back. Having said that, persevering with it, it's now the most freeing and wonderful and fun sport that I do. I absolutely love it. And sometimes I go in on a normal surfboard. A lot of the times I go in on a stand-up paddle surfboard. That's my favourite surfboard to surf now. And each sort of craft that you go in on brings a different experience. And I went into stand-up paddle surfing because I injured my rotator cuff normal surfing, so I did it completely by default. I didn't intend to start stand-up paddle surfing. I was in Bali and I was just surfing away and tore my rotator cuff and had a great big 11-foot stand-up paddleboard out with me because I was planning to sup some of the lakes. And there was a case of, well, either I take this board out in the waves and have a play around, or I don't surf for the next week. So I did that. And that again changed the whole dynamic of surfing for me, to a completely different sport and a different kind of enjoyment. So I think what I'm trying to say is, yes, it is a difficult thing to get a grasp on, and it is hard to get to the level that you see, on YouTube and that kind of thing. It's very, very difficult to get to that stage, but the build up to that can be so much more than just struggle. It can be enjoying being at that beginner stage and just playing around in the waves. And once you can start catching those green waves and the unbroken waves, it's so worth all of that agony and frustration and salt water pouring out of your nose for days after being in the ocean. It's brilliant. It's such a pleasure.
I think it's interesting because I think this is definitely a case of where it's actually about the journey. It's not about the destination. Because when you talked about the perseverance needed, it's a sport which actually takes years to develop. And I think there's almost this pressure now in society that if you start something, you've got to be excellent or outstanding and amazing. But actually, if you're just going out there and playing and having fun, you're using all your muscles, you're out there in the water releasing those endorphins and probably having an amazing time, even if you only get to ride one or two waves or don't even get to ride any waves.
Yeah, you're so right. And to expect to be able to surf really well even after a week of solid surfing is it's not going to happen. Basically, you need to be doing it time and time again for years and years to get to a really good level. But it doesn't matter if you can accept that you're going in there to enjoy it and to play in the water and to have a laugh, then that's also the best way to progress. Because if you're going in there all uptight and frustrated and doing it to prove something and to try and be something, then you're never going to enjoy it enough to want to keep doing it and to want to progress. And I strongly believe that with any sport that you're trying to get good at, you're only going to get good at it if you enjoy it enough to want to keep doing it. So if you make yourself hate it, you're not going to get anywhere with it. So yeah, and if you are a budding surfer and you're sort of saying to people, I'm not really a surfer, I'm not very good at it, it doesn't matter. That you're a surfer as much as the next person. If you're enjoying it as much as they are, that's all it is. That's all it is.
It's the same with running really as well. Oh, I'm not much of a runner, I'm not that quick, and it's like, does not matter. It doesn't matter at all.
So I shuffle when I run, and so I can identify with that. I'm just starting to get into running now, so I can identify with that. And I did the same for the first few weeks. Oh, can't run, not a very good runner. And someone said to me, anyone can run. All it is putting one foot in front of each other a little bit faster than walking. And if you can find a way to run that you can enjoy it, then again, that's the way to get good at it. And so I hated road running, absolutely hated it. I found it tedious and boring and it hurt. And so I've started fell running, and every step is a little bit different and it uses your muscles in a slightly different way, and it's so mentally stimulating. And now, because I enjoy it, even if I'm literally dragging my feet up a fell, I can almost see the point of it now. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's finding a way to enjoy it, isn't it? It's finding a way to enjoy it and not putting yourself down just because you're not a pro.
Exactly. And it's about following those passions. So you mentioned that you went from surfing, you had, an accident in Bali and tore your rotator cuff, and then you started stand-up paddleboarding. Tell us just a little bit more about your stand-up paddleboarding in Cornwall and what you did in 2016.
Yeah, so when I started stand-up paddle surfing, I'd done a little bit of flat water paddling by that point. So the reason I had my stand-up paddleboard in Bali was I wanted to go on the lakes and paddle around all these beautiful lakes up in the north of Bali, which I did, and it was wonderful. So that's what got me into stand-up paddle surfing. Now, stand-up paddleboarding, in the way we talk about it in general, is quite different from the surfing side of things. And I moved down to the southwest, so down to Devon, about 2014, 2015. And stand-up paddleboarding to me was the first sport that I managed to do since having my hip operated on. So I'd gone from being the captain of my football team, captain of the hockey team, surfing all the time up in Edinburgh, to being completely incapable. I couldn't walk. I couldn't walk down the hospital corridor when I was trying to do my finals at vet school. I was really, really in a bad way. And I finally got the operation on my hip, and basically had a lot of self-talk saying, right, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't run, I can't do sport anymore. And because the sports I was used to were very high impact running based sports like hockey and football, and I hadn't really thought of any other ways to get fit again. I'd kind of just resigned myself to the fact that that was it now. I'd have to, just swim and forget about all the sort of high impact stuff. And then I started paddleboarding when I was in Plymouth, and it not only became a sport that I could do, but it improved my strength, my core strength, my fitness, got me out into the water, got me meeting loads of people, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. And it became something that I could do, that I felt capable with. And I was never a particularly strong paddler, so I'd go out with a bunch of guys and girls quite regularly, and I was never at the front of the pack or very fast, but I could do it. I could balance on the board and I could get from A to B, and I loved it. It was a way to get in the ocean. It was brilliant. And then and then that got me back into surfing, and I got fit again to surf again, and everything started to fit together, and I started getting fit and loving being back in the ocean, and everything was starting to fit again. Because I was spending so much time in the water again, I was seeing heaps and heaps of plastic washing up onto the beaches, and in the rivers and the estuaries that we were paddling in. And it basically broke my heart. I was well aware that this plastic was ubiquitous within the ocean, and every beach I was on, there was just piles and piles of it, high up above the shoreline. I wanted to do something about it. So I started, and I thought the way to tackle it was to get it off the beaches. So I started running beach cleans with Surfers Against Sewage, and we did loads of beach cleans and shifted tons and tons of plastic, and it was brilliant. But the impact I found to be the most effective was at the beach cleans, when I'd start talking to people about where the plastic was coming from, and what we could do as individuals to actually help to stem the flow of plastic from land into the sea in the first place. So it's one thing picking up the plastic on the beaches, but we've got to find a way to stop it getting there. So I don't know why I decided to do it or what came over me, but I think one morning I basically woke up and I was like, right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to paddle from Plymouth to Croyd, which is the entire Cornish coast and part of North Devon and South Devon as well. It was about 300 miles. I thought, right, I'm going to do this, and this is going to be my way of talking to people about this issue of plastic pollution, because at this time as well, it wasn't so much in the media, so people weren't talking about it, people weren't aware of it, and I just thought, we need to do something about it. I need to do something about it. I need to talk to people about this, and I want to find a way to do it. And so I chose this ridiculous challenge as a way to talk to people. And I invited SUP clubs to come and join me, and I wanted to sort of talk to the paddleboarding community around the southwest, and help them understand how they could make a difference as well. But I also wanted to talk to a wider range of people that maybe wouldn't be exposed to this ocean environment, maybe wouldn't be as connected to it, about how every single one of us can make a difference. So I set off on this big mission, basically, and I was focusing particularly on single-use plastic water bottles. I was finding hundreds and hundreds of them in little hidden coves and washing up onto beaches and actually floating in the ocean. And it struck me as absolutely ridiculous that we're using so many of these in the UK when we've got safe drinking water, and it's cheap and it's abundant. And so I wanted to say to people, yes, we've got this massive problem of plastic pollution in the ocean and all these plastic bottles, but rather than focus on the problem and how awful it is, let's focus on the solutions and the positive things that we can do, the first of which being to choose a reusable water bottle. So I tried to encourage people through this paddle, this vehicle, use it as a sort of talking point, to talk to people about basically refilling water bottles and not buying so many single-use plastic water bottles. In the UK, we use 38.5 million plastic water bottles every single day. And I just thought it was a ridiculous amount to be using when less than half of them are recycled and so many are ending up in the ocean. So that was the basis behind that challenge. And I set out from Plymouth as pretty much a complete ocean paddling rookie, and I learned as I went. It was very, very challenging. I don't know how I'd have done it if I didn't have the balance and the board skills from stand-up paddle surfing, because it was so difficult. I was paddling through 6-foot waves to get off the beaches some days. I was paddling into 20-mile-an-hour headwinds. We had fog. We had crazy tidal races around some of the headlands that actually meant that we couldn't get anywhere and had to turn back some days. And it was absolutely brilliant. And it really ignited this fire within me for paddleboarding expeditions.
That's awesome. I was going to say, I mean, that must have been scary, like 6-foot waves, 20-mile-an-hour headwinds. You obviously learnt a lot as you went through this process. Was there a boat following you, or were there other people paddleboarding with you?
No, there was no boat. So I'd planned to do it on my own. And I was going to invite SUP clubs to join me around the way. But as it turned out, the conditions in the 3 weeks that I'd planned it were so terrible that it wasn't fair to put anyone else into that situation, and it wasn't appropriate for anybody else to be in that situation. So I had a pal who came round and filmed the expedition with me. So there were two of us. He'd been on a paddleboard twice before he came, but was also a real ocean man. So he knew about the ocean and was comfortable in that environment. And it was a huge learning curve. And basically, before I went, I had this sort of invincibility complex where I thought, oh, it's only the ocean, it's only paddleboarding, how hard can it be? And a couple of days in, I realised how hard it could be when I couldn't move against the headwind. I was going backwards. There was nowhere to get out on the water. There was one day when the swell was so big and the wind was against me, and I got blown so close to a cliff that I still to this day do not know how I didn't get smashed against that cliff in the massive waves that were coming against it. You know, a lot of people think of paddleboarding as this really lovely, calm sport that you do in a very sheltered area on a lake. And that's a really beautiful and mindful side of paddleboarding. This is a completely different environment altogether. And I basically thought that mind over matter, I'd be absolutely fine as long as my mind was in place and I stayed determined, and I just, kept going and kept paddling, and, I'd find the strength from somewhere if the wind picked up. And it was a very, very important reminder to me of how strong the ocean is and how vulnerable and weak we are against the forces of nature. It was a real wake-up call for me, and a reminder of how much we need to respect that environment. And we're not built to be in that environment. And when I was faced by these great big waves against cliffs, I thought, you stupid girl, Kat, you've not thought this through. But came out unscathed, just about.
Mentally, it must have been so difficult. I mean, I can imagine, trying to keep calm in those situations, keep, persevering, keep going. There must have been a lot of fears coming to the surface. Are you putting yourself in a dangerous situation? Should I continue doing this? Do I need to stop? Do I need to take a break? Mentally, how did you keep things together?
Yeah, I hadn't accounted for the mental challenge. That was definitely the hardest side of things. And as well, I'd never been that exhausted before. So it was my first ever expedition. The entire drive behind it had been this need to talk to people about plastic pollution. So I don't think I'd really at that stage considered the extremeness of the challenge from a physical or a mental point of view. The long and short of it is I didn't keep it together. There was a day after that day I nearly got smashed into the cliffs. I was an absolute wreck. I woke up crying. I spent the entire day crying until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when I finally plucked up the courage to get back on the water. And it takes a lot to make me cry. So this was quite like a real shock to me. And I felt like I'd failed. I felt like I'd lost my mind. I was like, what's going on? And I realized that I was physically exhausted, but mentally exhausted, because for the entire time I was on the water during the days, my mind was trained onto every wave, every cloud, every gust of wind. It was a overstimulation from everywhere around me, all these conditions that I had to think of. And then when I nearly got into some serious trouble with it, it was almost like it was just too much. Basically, it was just a real shock to the system of how quickly things can go very, very wrong when you're in the ocean. And I'd prepared, I knew about the ocean. I knew everything there was to know about tides. I knew about waves, and knew about the dangers. And I was still getting in trouble. And I think that was what was quite scary. Yeah, really, really scary.
I mean, and you didn't actually end, well, you did end your challenge obviously in Cornwall, but that wasn't the end of the paddleboarding. It wasn't the end of paddling against plastic, because in 2017 you headed off to the Isle of Skye. So I'd love to know what happened in between these two adventures, these two expeditions. I mean, did you finish the Cornwall one and just think, I'm never doing that again?
No, I didn't actually. I finished the Cornwall one and pretty much straight away thought, yeah, I want to do this again. Not Cornwall. Probably didn't want to paddleboard in Cornwall for a long time. But it was because I didn't have any expectations of what an expedition would be like. I wasn't in this. There's this big scene now with women in adventure and adventurers that I've been introduced to that I had no idea of at that stage. Like, for me, it was all about reaching people about plastic. And so having expeditions, done an expedition, if you like, I was introduced to this world of being out in nature non-stop and experiencing all these incredible places, and the physical challenge and the mental challenge, and also the audiences that I could speak to through this vehicle of paddleboarding. So almost immediately I knew that I wanted to do another challenge. And I knew that I wanted it to be a harder challenge. Cornwall was really tough, but by this stage, I was now a pretty competent paddleboarder, and I wanted to do something that was going to be really extreme, that hadn't been, really done much before. And so I decided to paddle around the Isle of Skye in Scotland, which is basically really remote. And Scotland is renowned for big swell again, big winds. And the unique thing about the Isle of Skye is because it's an island and it's slotted between several other islands, it's got crazy tidal races, like really strong, 7 knots in some places, which if you get them wrong, you're stuffed, basically. So between Cornwall and the Isle of Skye, what did I do? I went over to Indonesia to surf for a little while over the winter, which was basically recovery, and then got on to planning my Skye expedition. And the Skye expedition was more extreme in a lot of ways in terms of the conditions up there in Scotland, but also the fact that I was completely alone there. So I was alone on the water, I was unsupported on land, I carried all my kit with me, I camped every night, and it was just me and just my perseverance. And that was the most wonderful thing about the Skye expedition was doing it alone. And it was a very, very different feeling to the Cornwall expedition, even though it was directed at highlighting the single-use plastic as well. It was done in a very, very different way. So the Isle of Skye is so remote and so beautiful, and there's an incredible amount of wildlife there, and it's a really treasured holiday destination for some people. And I wanted to show that even these super remote places where there are sea eagles circling overhead, and there's dolphins in the water, and there's seals everywhere, and it's so wild, they are really, really vulnerable to plastic pollution as well. And it highlighted it to me as much as to anybody else. I wasn't expecting to see as much as I did.
How long was the expedition for?
The Skye expedition was just under 2 weeks, so I'd expected it to take about 3, and it took 12 days in total, 3 of which were set out because of a storm, but there were about 9 days on the water in total.
How did you find it, spending that much time sort of being alone, being on the water in this incredibly beautiful environment, but again, just being sort of alone?
Amazing. I think I've come to the realization that I really value solitude, and I think in our daily lives and in society we're subjected to so much noise and so much bullshit and so much pressure that is completely unnecessary. And when you get back and you strip it back to being in nature by yourself, you start to realize what's important. So I thought a lot about my friends. I thought a lot about my family. I thought a lot about what it means to be a human and what it means to be part of this beautiful natural world, and how important it is for us to protect it. Also being alone. So if you'd have told me before I went out some of the situations that I got into around the Isle of Skye, and that I'd be alone, I'd have to make all of those decisions myself, I'd have been terrified, and I'd have thought, no, how on earth am I going to make those decisions? I need someone to talk to, I need help, I need physical help. And actually being alone in those situations, I realized that despite what society and parents and friends and people tell you about your limitations and about what you can and can't achieve, there is so much more strength and resilience and power and knowledge deep down inside, if only we are forced into tapping into it. And so I'm really grateful for the extremely challenging situations that I had to overcome on my own, because it's taught me that now. Like, I can do it. I can do anything I put my mind to. And we are so much more intelligent and powerful and intuitive than we give ourselves credit for.
Could you share one of those challenging situations with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the worst time was the first day when I'd come round from where I set off, and I set off in beautiful, calm conditions. It was sunny. There was very little wind, and what little wind there was right behind me. So it's pushed me along the coast, and I was proper smug, and I was like, yeah, this is going to be great. And there were birds, and it was absolutely beautiful. And then all of a sudden, the wind switched direction, and it started blowing directly offshore, and it was about 30 mile an hour, which is incredibly strong on a paddleboard. And I basically got blown out to sea, and I was paddling and paddling and paddling as fast and as hard as I could against the wind. And because I had all my bags basically piled high on the front of my board, the wind was picking up the bags and spinning my board out to sea. So I had no control at all, and I was getting further and further away from land. And I was hyperventilating, I was sweating, I was screaming. I didn't know what to do. There were sea buoys in the water, and I kept trying to paddle to them for something to hold on to. And every single one, I was just getting blown past it. And my VHF radio was in my backpack. So if I wanted to call the Coast Guard for help, I'd have had to stop paddling and reach that, which would have meant getting blown even further out in that time it took to get my radio. And I honestly thought, this is it. I'm going to get blown out to sea. I'm going to have to get rescued. I'm going to have to stay calm and look after myself. I knew I had a locator beacon so that I could alert the rescue services, so that was fine. But I was terrified. I didn't think I'd have to be rescued by the Coast Guard on day one. And eventually I managed to get to a sea buoy, and I held on to it, and I turned my board directly into the wind, which was the biggest problem. I couldn't turn my board because of the wind. Managed to direct my board directly into the wind. I stopped. I took a breather. I stuffed my face with flapjack, which is probably not the first thing a lot of people would think to do in an emergency situation. But my mum's a feeder, so she's always taught me to eat in emergency situations. And I basically put my head down, and I paddled hell for leather towards the shore, and it took what seemed like forever to get there. And I finally got to shore, and got back to safety, and it was just sheer cliffs. There was nowhere to land, so I had to keep paddling. I had to paddle another something like 5 miles, I think, staying so close into land that the wind couldn't pick me up and take me out, until I got to where I was going that night. And I got to where I was going, and I was so scared, and I was shaking, and I couldn't get warm, and I was absolutely exhausted, and I was alone, and I had no phone signal. I had no one to talk to, and I basically knew at that stage, without a shadow of a doubt, that I wasn't getting back on the water again. I didn't have any desire to. And I finally managed to get off to sleep that night, and then woke up the next day, and the blooming water was flat calm, and there was no wind, and the sun was out. I was like, right, if I don't get back on the horse now, I'm never going to paddleboard again. So I forced myself back onto the water and thought, right, I've just got to do 3 miles to the next beach, and that's all I have to do today. And that day I managed 30 miles. I just went and I kept going, and it was one of the best days paddling I've ever had. And I'm so glad that I made myself go back out, because I could quite easily have just called the whole thing off. That's what I wanted to do. But I'm really, really happy I kept going.
And you know, I would totally suggest eating flapjacks in an emergency situation.
My mum packed me off with this big box of flapjack, and I thought, right, if ever there's a time for your mum's flapjack, it's now.
I suppose it's because you always want to make sure that you've been fed, you're hydrated, you can, you know, take a breather, think calmly, what do you need to do? And actually sometimes that can just calm you down a little bit, just doing something a little bit normal. Absolutely. Having some of your mum's flapjack sounds great.
And that sea boy was like a little lifesaver for me, because without that, I couldn't have had that break and that mental reset. I needed just to come back down and say, right, okay, what is the sensible plan of action here? It's, like you say, hydrating yourself, it's getting some calories in you, and it's just, you know, brute force going for it.
Yeah. Well, because equally, you don't know, you know, once you started paddling again, how long you'd be paddling for again. If you're, you know, it could be another, you know, an hour, it could be 5 hours, it could be more, and actually you need to keep yourself energized. What was the coastline like, sort of going around? I mean, was the pollution as extreme as it was down in Cornwall? Was it less because it's the Isle of Skye? You know, what was it like up there?
Well, the first thing to say is that it's very remote. So a lot of the beaches that I was stopping at were not really accessible by land. So I think for that reason, a lot of the plastic pollution is hidden from view. And this isn't just the case in the Isle of Skye. This is the case on a lot of the Scottish islands. I've been really privileged actually to have gone to the Outer Hebrides, the Inner Hebrides, and on all of these remote islands, because they are west facing and they're taking a lot of battering from the sea, they get a lot of plastic washed up. And the beaches that are accessible by land are oftentimes cleaned up, which is fantastic. The beaches which aren't, it often goes unnoticed. So the coastline around Skye, it's a lot of very, very tall cliffs and not very many places to land. So I think every beach that I did land in at funneled a lot of the plastic in. And I'd expected to see some plastic, but nowhere near as much as I did find. There was one beach I stopped at where the plastic came a good 100, 200 meters up the beach, onto the grass behind the beach. I've never seen so much plastic before in my life. It was absolutely horrendous. It was like a carpet of fishing rope and buoys and single-use plastic items and bottles and every single-use plastic item you could think of in this, I call it like a good sort of 3-inch deep carpet, basically, from where the sea was to 100 meters back. And the tragic thing about this beach was that it backed onto a farm, so it was habitat for sheep and cows. So the beach was basically just covered in plastic, sheep and cows, and the sheep and cows were eating it. And as a vet, I felt so helpless, so upset that these animals were suffering as a result of our single-use plastic habit. And I hadn't really made that connection before then. You know, we see the turtles with the straw stuck up the nose. We see the seals wrapped up in fishing nets, but we don't think about how it's affecting our domesticated animals on land as well. so to see that with my own eyes was heartbreaking, but also a really important eye-opener for me. And I spoke to a couple of farmers on the way around, and they relayed to me that they've had to have several of their beautiful, prized and much loved Highland cows cut open to have plastic removed from their stomachs because they're starving to death. And so it was much more of a problem than I'd anticipated. And like I said, I don't think that's unique to Skye. It's all over the world, and it's particularly in these Western Scottish Islands.
Yeah. Oh God, it is just absolutely heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, with your preparation for the trip, I mean, you're out there for 2 weeks carrying all your own stuff. How did you manage your supplies, like food and water?
Not very well. So.
Because I say that because I normally end up eating all my food within like the first 2 days. And I'm like, I'm so hungry.
That's exactly what I did. So I didn't ration myself at all. I didn't really think through what I'd eat when, because I thought I'd be there for 3 weeks. When I got to the top of Skye and realised that I'd only have about 3 or 4 days left, I basically just stuffed my face for a couple of days. So I made sure I ate a lot of carbs, which I found really useful. Like I said, I didn't ration myself. I basically just had a selection of food with me and ate what I felt like I could eat that night. So I think one night I had, it was gross. I had like mashed potato and quinoa or something, and that was my dinner. And I was so tired and so hungry that it was the best thing in the world. And I made sure I ate every hour on the hour. So that was like something to look forward to. Like I'd have a watch on and I'd make sure that on the hour that was snack time, and I wasn't allowed to eat until then. So that kind of kept me going a bit. And if I don't eat every hour, my metabolism is such that I really need to. And if I don't, I get very weak and quite useless, basically. So I carried all my food supplies with me and just made sure I stocked up. Ate whenever I could. There was one place around the island where I could stock up, and I basically bought their entire shelf of Tunnock's tea cakes because by this stage I was so desperate for a treat. And then water, I had a great big clean canteen 2-litre bottle with me, which was fantastic. And then just filled up from streams where I stopped. So I'd purify my water from streams, and that was fine. There was plenty streams on the island to fill up from.
So obviously, I mean, with the challenges that you've done from Cornwall and the Isle of Skye, it's the profile raising, paddle against plastic, which is absolutely amazing. It's also an adventure for you, a personal challenge. What have you learned from these expeditions?
What have I learned? A lot, an awful lot. I've learned a lot about my own ability, and I've learned a lot about the way I work, my mental strength, my physical strength. I've learned that I enjoy being alone. I've learned that the reconnection to nature is really important. So when I'm not expeditioning, if I come back and if I get completely absorbed in life and society and not going out and being out on the water, out in nature, I go a bit crazy. So that's been a real eye-opener for me about how important it is for me to spend that time in nature. I've learned so much about paddleboarding and about the ocean. And I think through running the campaign as well, I've learned that so the whole point behind the Paddle Against Plastic campaign was to bring positivity to it. I think with environmentalism, there's so much negativity and doom and gloom, and it's such a turn off for people. And I've learned that people are really craving this positivity. And when I can relate to people through my adventures and through talking to people about them, that rather than feeling guilty about what plastic we're using, we can actually feel really proud and positive about little changes we can make in our daily lives, whether it's a reusable water bottle or a coffee cup. That's where the real impactful change can come from. So I think my relationship to these adventures and these sort of adventuring with a purpose has been one of the most profound things for me, and to try and relate that to people. So a lot of people do their adventures so that they can talk to people and share their stories. And absolutely, that's the reason for me to do mine, in a way that people can relate to them and can relate to the message behind it, and sort of feel part of part of a tribe.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of, for our listeners out there who are wanting to do something against plastic pollution, but sometimes might feel a little bit helpless because they can't do the big changes that are needed, whether that's by governments or institutions or companies. But as individuals, what advice and tips would you have for individuals and how they could change their own personal behaviours to help with the, I was going to say the battle against plastic, as, you know. Yeah.
I think the first and foremost thing is to try not to feel overwhelmed by it. It can seem like a huge, huge mission to fight this massive problem of plastic pollution, but you're not alone. There are millions of people around the world who now care about it. And the first thing to do is just to add your voice to that community of people who care about it, and to start getting curious about what we can do to change our ways. It's not to feel guilty about the plastic that we are using, but to feel really proud about the plastic that we're switching out. So making little changes in our everyday lives might not seem like enough of a thing to make a big difference to this global problem, but it's a start. So if everybody made these little changes, it would be a massive improvement. But also, every little change that you do make then passes on to another person. Someone else sees you do it, and they get on board as well. So I strongly believe that the way to tackle plastic pollution is to become aware of it, to become aware of the fact that the more we use on land, the more ends up in the ocean. So we've got to stop using so much on land. And the responsibility for that cannot all come down to the consumer. It's got to be made easier by the companies and by the government. But it's not going to be done so until there are enough consumers who care about it. So care about it, talk to your friends about it, start looking at what plastic you're using in your daily life and start to reduce it where you can. So on my website, paddleagainstplastic.com, there are several tips on sort of 10 easy switches that you can change out of your life to reduce your plastic usage. The most important, the easiest in my eyes is switching to a reusable water bottle. Coffee cups are lined with plastic, disposable coffee cups. So get a reusable coffee cup. Refuse straws in your drinks when you go out for drinks. Just look at all these little ways where plastic is creeping into your life and see where you can switch it out. And if you're down at the beach, then picking up a couple of pieces of litter and taking them away with you will not only remove them from the environment, but other people will see you doing it too, and they'll start to look at the plastic that's on the beach as well. So I think the important thing is not to be overwhelmed by it, not to feel like you have to take all the burden on yourself and do everything immediately, but to start making these changes, start getting curious about it, and be really super proud of all the changes that you can make, and encourage others to do so. And if you need any specific suggestions, and please feel free to get in touch. Or as I say, have a little look on my website. There's also loads of Facebook pages now with loads of tips on how you can reduce your individual plastic usage. And once we start collaborating on this and really getting people together as a voice to say, actually, we're not okay with this, that's when I believe that the governments will start to make it easier, the companies will start to make it easier. And we're already starting to see that change with a lot of the larger companies who are taking responsibility for their own plastic usage as well now.
2016, it was paddleboarding in Cornwall. 2017, it was the Isle of Skye. What's going to be the challenge for you in 2018?
So 2018, this challenge has been on my mind for years now. So I think well before I did the Cornwall challenge, this was popping up in my mind. But I was sort of curious about it, but knew that it was going to basically be a massive, great big challenge. And I want to paddle from Land's End in Cornwall to John O'Groats at the top of Scotland, which is a massive, great big mission. It's never been done before on a paddleboard. The route I want to take encompasses the whole of the Welsh coast, and it's basically from the very bottom of England to the very top of Scotland. And I want to do it unsupported, so there won't be a boat with me on the water. I'm going to hopefully have a few people join me along the way for parts of it, but the majority of it's going to be solo again. and I want to use as little single-use plastic, if possible, no single-use plastic along the way. And again, use it as a vehicle to highlight the problem of plastic pollution from the bottom of our country all the way to the top of Scotland, and sort of show people that we're never really too far away from plastic pollution, but also want to try and reconnect people to this beautiful ocean environment we have all around our country that's often overlooked. And I think that disconnect between our lives and the ocean is often part of the reason why we struggle with this environmentalism. It's because we're not connected enough to it. Whereas if we can reconnect to the environment, reconnect to ourselves, I hope it can really nurture a love for the environment and the ocean, and a desire to protect it.
How long do you think it will take, and when are you going to start?
I reckon 3 to 4 months, and I'm going to start in May.
In May. Oh my gosh, fantastic. How are you feeling about
it? Super excited. Like I say, I've been planning this for 3 years in the background, and the last few months, really having it in the front of my mind. So very excited, incredibly nervous too. It's a massive challenge. It's going to take a long time. I've never been on an expedition that's taken this long before. And there's so much to think about with it as well, with the logistics. There's also a lot of exposed areas, really, really exposed areas, a lot of tidal races. There's going to be, I'm sure, some pretty gnarly parts of it, especially up in Scotland. But I also hope that it has the effect that I want in terms of helping to reconnect people to the environment and to this issue.
Are you going on the East Coast or the West Coast?
So I'm going to start on the West Coast, so all the way at the West Coast, and then there's a series of locks across Scotland called the Caledonian Canal, which I'll cross, and then up the east coast of Scotland to John O'Groats.
Fantastic. Well, if you pass through the Wirral and Liverpool way, you've got a place to come and stay.
Thanks very much.
Cal, incredible what you're doing, and especially in regards to, raising awareness about plastic. It is obviously a problem, but I love the way that you're bringing positivity to it. Cal, where is the best place for people to find more information about you, your future challenge, Land's End to John O'Groats, but also a Paddle Against Plastic?
So my website is www.paddleagainstplastic.com. There's information on there about all my previous paddles and my Land's End to John O'Groats. There's also information on there about my film Sky's the Limit, which was made of the Skye expedition. My Instagram is at Paddle Against Plastic. Facebook is Paddle Against Plastic UK, and Twitter is at Paddle versus Plastic. And I've got Instagram and Twitter accounts of Cal Major too. So whichever you feel like following, I'm on there, basically.
And will you be tracking your journey as well? Will there be a live map that people can follow along with?
Yes, I hope so. So that's all the stuff I've got to get in the next couple of months. I've got to sort out my live tracker. I want it to be an interactive journey. It's not just my journey. I want it to be open for anybody and everybody to feel like they're involved in it. So it's not me saying I'm some hardcore paddler and I'm going to paddle from Land's End to John O'Groats. It's me saying I want to engage our country in this problem, and however people feel like they want to get on board with it, whether it's talking to me about it, whether it's tracking me, whether it's coming and joining me at a beach and doing a little mini beach clean. I want that to be a sort of unified response to this plastic problem. So yes, absolutely, I'm going to have a tracker on there, and the more positivity we can raise, the better.
And Cal, just any final words of wisdom, final words of advice to leave for the Tough Girl Tribe?
Final words of wisdom for the Tough Girl Tribe. We women are stronger than we realise. And I'm so happy that there are places like this and all the wonderful communities of women adventuring that are available now for us to feel like a part of. Everyone's got their comfort zone. I strongly recommend trying to find a way to push your own comfort zone, not comparing it to anybody else's, but to acknowledge where your limits are and to try and push them. We're stronger than we realise. We're capable of more than we realise. And we're capable of more positive change in our environment and to our planet than we realise. And just little changes every day can really, really go a long way. So let's keep positive. Let's understand our environment. Let's understand ourselves. And be part of something amazing.
Love it. Cal, thank you so much for coming on Tough Girl Podcast to share your story.
Thank you.
Hey tribe, I hope you were inspired by the awesome Cal Major. What an absolute inspiration, inserting positivity into her message around plastic pollution. There are lots of simple things that you can do to help overcome this. I mean, I think many of us do this already, taking a reusable bag with you wherever you go, ditching the plastic water bottle, using the tap to get your water, buy a reusable coffee cup if you drink coffee. There's just so much different things that you can do, especially with regards to not using straws as well. You can make these changes yourself. So be the change you want to see in the world. Massive thank you to everybody who is supporting the Tough Girl Podcast, who is a patron. You can support the podcast. You can become a patron. You can help me with my mission by visiting Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast to find out more about how it works, how you can get involved, and what the benefits are you from supporting the podcast and from supporting me with my message and the mission to increase the amount of female role models in the media. Please do go check out toughgirlchallenges.com for all the information that you could possibly need, more information about me, my background, the books that I've written, more information about the incredible women that I've interviewed. I've started the podcast in 2015. There's now I think it's around 150 episodes for you to go back and listen to. It's approximately around 130 hours of content of just incredible women sharing their stories, their journey, their life, what they've learned, why they did it, and how they did it. So you can actually take these practical tips, this practical piece of advice, and apply it to your own life. Please do tell a friend about the Tough Girl Podcast. This is how I spread the word and get the message out there. I don't have a big marketing budget. It is just me at home doing this. So any help that you can give me is appreciated so much. So please do check out toughgirlchallenges.com. I will be back with you next Tuesday for another awesome episode of the Tough Girl Podcast. Take care, have an awesome day, and I'll speak to you soon. Lots of love.